Hello, this is Dr. Seth Jenny again. The last thing that I want to cover relating to research ethics and IRB and informed consent is actually evaluating and looking at journal articles to see whether these components are included explicitly in the papers. And so this information comes from How to Critique Journal Articles in the Social Sciences, Harris, 2014. So what Harris recommends if you're trying to look for imperfections in research ethics and you're reading academic research, peer-reviewed journal articles, look to see if the authors explicitly state that they collected the signed consent forms. A lot of times when you submit to a journal, they will require you to have a statement relating to this study was approved by an institutional review board, an IRB. They don't always require you to list that participant consent was attained prior to the conducting the study. Some do, however, but that's one thing to look for, and I'll show you some examples of that in a second. It would be normally be in the methods section. Next, did the participants know the study was voluntary? For the most part, you're not going to really be able to know that. You might surmise that based upon who the researchers were as well as who the participants were. So if they were college students, you might potentially believe that maybe they were coerced into participating because their professor made them do it. But that's not, really, you're not going to definitely know the answer to that, but always something to be considered, as well as consider whether any incentives were offered and whether these may have been coercive in some way. I'll show you an example of one of those in a second. A lot of times to increase your participation rate, you might pay the participants, or you might raffle a certain item that's desirable, or you might give every participant maybe a gift certificate somewhere. And then lastly, question the possible cause of unusually high response rates. So especially for survey research, you're looking at typical, depending upon how it's conducted, 15-20%. If you're seeing 95-99%, then it's potential that it was a vulnerable population that was coerced or required to respond or participate in the research. So let's look at some examples here of a methods section. And the method at the beginning of the methods section, we're typically going to describe the participants, and we're looking for where does it discuss IRB or consent. So here they're just talking in this paper who the participants were, and I'm going to go to the top of the next column. And we can see here at the end of the description of the sample, it says, the A.T. Still University Institutional Review Board approved the study, and written informed consent was obtained from all participants prior to their participation. A lot of times when this was an experimental study looking at motion-based video games and Nintendo Wii. A lot of times when you see survey research, you don't always see the informed consent explicitly listed in there when you're looking at the procedures. All right, let's take a look at another study, and we're going to go up slightly. Here is the methods section, talking about the subjects in the research setting, and they talk about how what part of the country, the socioeconomic status of these participants, and then last sentence. This project was approved by the University of Utah IRB and the school district. All parents provided consent, and the children provided assent forms before this study. And so that's one thing, very easy to mix those two up, but just know that when we're talking about consent forms, these are adults. When we're talking about assent forms, these are children. And the distinguishing thing between those, they're going to be very similar, but they need to be written at the language of what the people can comprehend. So, and even for example, if you're conducting a study where the region is primarily Spanish speaking, that consent form needs to be written in Spanish as well. If you're doing English as well. For children, you need to not use big words. You need to be using words that are understandable to the children. And then let's take a look at one last one, which is one of my studies here on motion-based video games and rock climbing. And so here we describe the design of the study, the participants, talk a little bit about the demographics of the participants, but then we start here. Institutional Review Board approval and participant consent were obtained prior to the start of the study. Recruitment included informational emails. So this is how we sampled to get to recruit, flyers, and word of mouth, as offering incentives is an effective common means of encouraging participation that is ethically justifiable. And so we threw a citation in there to defend that statement. Participants were given a chance to win an iPad mini through a raffle. And so to increase our response rate, to have more, to get more people involved in the study, that was something that we did to try to increase the number of participants that would want to participate, and that may have biased our sample, but that was a risk that we were willing to take to get the study accomplished and to recruit those participants. So that is a summary of things that you should be looking for whenever you are reading some of those academic journal articles. See, do they talk about IRB approval, consent? How was the sample selected? Were incentive items given? And do you think that any of those things may have impacted the results in a biased type of way?